And if I can riff on Monty Python, and now for something completely similar. A visit to the Cumbres Toltec Scenic Railroad. Actually, there's pictures from two visits, but I mentioned the narrow gauge circle before. And here it is on a map of the Denver Rio Grande Western. We're going to be looking at the Cumbres Toltec, which starts in Chama and goes to Antonito. So hang on. By the way, the rest of the circle, here's the Rio Grande Southern coming around, completing the circle, the Ouray branch, the Gunnison and the old main line, and then the Valley line down again to Antonito. That's your narrow gauge circle. But that's actually another two shows I have available. The Denver Rio Grande Western San Juan extension, trackage from Antonito to Chama, was placed into regular service during February 1881. From Chama to Durango, the track was completed as of July 7th, 1881. Trackage between Durango and Antonito, with a third rail on to Alamosa and Carbon Junction to Farmington, was abandoned by the Denver and Rio Grande Western as of December 5th, 1968. Chama, New Mexico, where the former Denver and Rio Grande Western Station, although extended, now serves the Cumbres Toltec Scenic Railroad. Their reservation facility is located in this freight house extension. Early morning at the Chama engine house, K36-488 develops a fault. 3 fire bricks fell out of the firebox. Not a good thing. 489 stands ready for the day's train to Antonito. The digger here is used to Koehler locomotives. And over on the other side, the last mud hen in Colorado, the 463, stands cold in front of the Chama Roundhouse. There's a mud hen in California and one up in Michigan. There were originally 15 of them, and they were the most numerous of the Denver and Rio Grande's 282 narrow gauge classes. Lee's Georgetown, Breckenridge, and Leadville 15 is seen here in Chama, New Mexico on the Cumbres Toltec Scenic. And yes, that's Thomas to the left. The usual Chama switcher for the Cumbres Toltec is this unnumbered little critter that was built by a company called Rogers. The original passenger cars were converted from box cars. They are now out of service, and having ridden them, I'm glad they're out of service. Passenger car 503 Bighorn began life as a fish belly frame flat car on the Denver and Rio Grande. The 1997 build of cars looked more railroady. The 517 was built from a steel standard gauge flat car numbered AX 4629. It's basically fiberglass panels on a steel frame. But you can see with the roof and the platform ends, it looks a lot more railroady than the earlier build of cars, which were just square boxes. Pipe Gondola 9613 is one of two that have been rebuilt as an observation car. And 2 cars, which were originally coaches, have been further rebuilt as parlor observation cars. Now, notice the drum sign. Notice it is tilted to one side. That is not an accident on the Cumbres Toltec. One of the interesting things was on the San Juan Express, both drumhead signs had a design fault in them, and the glass ended up always being tilted to one side. So when the Cumbres Toltec Scenic decided to put drumheads on the back of their observation cars, they made sure that the glass was tilted. An extra caboose was created by rebuilding stock car 5635. And they didn't bother to change the number. They just put 0 in front of the stock car number. At Chama, the signature coal tower and sand house still stand, although they're no longer used. This is the sand house and tower in the close to us, and then the coal tower. At Chama, a double spout water tank serves the steam locomotives. This is the main line, and over here is the siding that goes into the engine house area. Also at Chama is this log cabin engine crew bunkhouse. 489 is on the run to Antonito this day. The Cumbres and Toltec Scenic follows all of their trains with a fire patrol track car. Not uncommon on the Colorado narrow gauge, by the way. It's almost a standard operating practice. A split switch at Chama needed repair before the train can leave. This was discovered only 10 minutes before the train was ready to leave for the morning. The gentleman you see with the sledgehammer is the guy destined to drive the fire patrol train. And basically they fixed a split switch by moving the switch stand, which pulled the switch tighter to the rail. There's a 4% grade from Chama to Cumbres, hard work for a K36. This is the 487. Now, back in Denver and Rio Grande Western days, the practice was that 12 cars would be a train of 12 cars with a caboose would be put together in the yard at Chama. 2 K36s or a K36 and a K37 would be put on the head end. They would take the 12 cars up to Cumbres, leave the 12 cars, return to Chama with the caboose, take another cut of 12 cars up to Cumbres. They'd couple the two together. One of the engines would get on the head end. The other engine would spot the caboose on the rear of the 24 freight cars. It would then return to Chama, and a single engine would take the train on into Antonito and then on to Alamosa. Excuse me. 487, the train passing the remains of the Lobato water tank. Interesting fact. That is not the Denver and Rio Grande Western water tank at Lobato. That water tank was built for the film, for a movie film, and was never used by a steam engine. There's no water supply attached to it. Here's an earlier picture of the 495 and 481 at the sheep loading pen at Lobato, June 27th, 1954. If those of you are familiar with the movement of livestock, it has to be unloaded and watered approximately every 12 hours. And Lobato was one of the locations at the Denver and Rio Grande that did that on their narrow gauge lines. Here's the same date. The 495 and 481 separated for crossing the Lobato trestle. The trestle in these days was only safe enough for a single locomotive to cross at a time. So when there was a double header, they would uncouple the lead locomotive. It would go across, just leave like one locomotive space on the other side. And then the train engine would pull the cars across the trestle and couple up. And then they would continue on towards Cumbres. This is a trestle that was destroyed a couple of years ago in a wildfire that totally devastated this area. What I find interesting is in 1954, this area was wide open. The fire occurred, this area was blackened. Look at how built up, or how, I don't know, built up isn't the word, just look at how much the trees have grown into this area. This is a brand new Lobato trestle that the 487 is about to cross. Cresco water tank from back in the day, the 495 and 481 approaching the tank. Here's the 483 as a pusher approaching the tank on another day. And here it is closer. Now again, there's only about 12 cars on this in this train, but 3 locomotives, which tell you how they got to deal with that 4% grade. Here's the Cresco water tank in 2013. There's also a telephone booth there. Here's the second crossing of Route 17 above Chama. The sign says no trespassing, private ranch land, and it also has a little thing. This applies to photographers. I'm standing on Route 17, so I don't have to be scared of what the rancher might do. Here's the 487 continuing to work up the 4% grade. What's great is you can ride the train one day, then chase it the next day following New Mexico and Colorado Route 17 for about half the trip to Osier. Here's the 487 and 4383 hauling a train upgrade toward Cumbres in 1974. Let me be honest, I was on a special fan trip that was sponsored by the NRHS to go to the San Francisco convention that day. And we had arranged for a photo stop at this location. So the train pulls to a stop and the locomotive engineer hauls down on the whistle to tell the crews that it's time to lower the steps so we can get off the boxcars. At that exact moment in this field that I'm now standing, something begins to move. It is a big brown bear. It just looks at all of us, it looks at the train, and it starts running so fast. I mean, it probably made it to Chicago with the rest of the bears before we finished taking our pictures. And here's the K36 489 approaching Windy Point. Okay, let's see. I denigrated the Chicago Bears. I wore the cheesehead hat. I suppose there's going to be a little extra in the pay packet when it comes at the end of the week. Here's the 487 taking the curve around Windy Point. This is a telephoto shot. And here's the same area from on board the train the previous day. If you've never done the Cumbres and Toltec, please do yourself a favor, add it to the list of things you want to do. And here's the 487 with the train stopped at Cumbres. The elevation here is 10,015 feet. And they stopped to cool the brake shoes here for a few moments. This is the former section foreman's home and train order office at Cumbres. The train order office is this section, and this is the house here. It's often mistaken for the long gone station building. The station was located over here on the other side of Route 17. That building is long gone, but the Friends of the mouth isn't working tonight. The Friends of the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic have it in their plans to someday recreate it. The car inspector's house at the time I was there in Cumbres was undergoing restoration. And the last remaining piece of snow shed on Cumbres Pass is on the tail of the Cumbres Y. Not seen these pictures is the picnic facility that the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic have erected at this site. They sometimes run half-day trips with music festivals at this location. Here we are at Tanglefoot Curve. We're coming down from Cumbres, 3 levels of track. The one here, here, and up here in the woods can be seen in this view. And here we are at Los Pinos water tank and the Los Pinos curve. The Los Pinos curve is one of the sharpest, the sharpest curve on the narrow gauge. Again, if you're chasing the train, here's Route 17 coming right down here, and I'm standing on Route 17, taking this picture. It's rather easy to chase. The train doesn't go fast. And here we are coming around the Los Pinos curve. Now, if you think I've got this picture pushed to the right a little too much, when you remember some of the famous John Krause pictures of this site, that's because over to the left, there's a little housing development now. Who wants to see modern houses? I want to see trains and mountain landscape. Here's a distant view of Osier taken from an approaching train. Time for lunch. Turkey to the left, meatloaf to the right, and if you want just salads, take the stairs to the lower level. And also you can see here is the Osier stock bins. The Osier train order office, the emergency coal dock is to the right. And the water tank is available, is still available for engines, although it's rarely used. They water at other locations. And here's the train order office, and here's the section foreman's house. This is a larger section foreman's house by Denver and Rio Grande Western standards. And here's the 487 on a Chama bound train in Osier Station. The stockyard is behind it. And from 1974, the 483 pauses for lunch at Osier en route to Antonito. Back in 483, lunch was served from open grills that you had to line up on, and there were picnic tables set up in the stockyard. They've come a long way. And a Chama bound train climbing towards Cumbres is seen from Osier. And here we are in the days of the boxcars. And this is a trestle below Toltec with a boxcar coach consist. Inside, these were basically Denver and Rio Grande Western boxcars that they chainsawed out the upper sections of sheathing. They then installed back-to-back fiberglass, those cheap fiberglass seats. They were not very comfortable. They did install walkways to go from car to car. There was one car in the consist, which was set up as a snack bar, and another car set up in the consist to sell souvenirs. This memorial to President Garfield at milepost 315.32 marks the entrance to the Toltec Gorge. It is also a station. It is also the site where a group of travel agents found out that President Garfield had been assassinated. Now, this has always intrigued me because traveling on the train, they would have had no connection with the telegraph. Remember, this is way back when. So how did they find out that he had been assassinated? They then, after finding that out, they took up a collection and they bought the money for this memorial that still stands to this day. And entering Rock Tunnel is viewed from an open car on an Antonito bound train. Here's the San Juan Express with behind the 483 instead of one of the 470s, westbound at Sublette on April 28th, 1950. The section foreman's house is Sublette, New Mexico. And the train order office at Sublette. Oh, I should point out that this line crosses the New Mexico-Colorado border no less than 7 times. Here's another log cabin bunkhouse. Again, it's Sublette. Leaving Toltec Gorge, one enters the lava flats, marked by the lonely lava water tank. As you can see, it's a very lonely area. The lava water tank is supplied by a pipeline that connects to a pump house that's about 5 miles away, located near a river at a much lower elevation. The lava station facilities are a phone booth and a signboard. Almost makes the Shacks seem inviting. Here's 1974. The 483 makes its way across the lava flats. And here's 487 on the lava flats approaching Antonito. And the Colorado parlor observation car carrying the train's drumhead. Again, notice the glass is tilted. Trains arriving in Antonito circle the loop. Inside it today is Cumbres Toltec Scenic 19, a 3-foot gauge 47 tonner that originally worked in Hawaii. And coupled to it are some former Butte, Anaconda, and Pacific hopper cars that have been cut down to narrow gauge. The Friends of the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic have a shop on the outside of the loop. Those are 2 tank cars that they recovered from a junkyard that they have they've restored, and they were just about finished except for the lettering. Next to the shop is the Friends Carport Display Facility. And the Cumbres and Toltec have erected their own car shop in the middle of the loop. And one stall of this car shop is used for the overnight locomotive storage here in Antonito. Here's the 3rd Antonito station. It's a modernized version of Durango. And here's the 487 arriving at that modernized Durango Antonito station. Overnight finds a K-36 sleeping in the rear of the Antonito car shops. The 2nd station at Antonito is now the office of the Bi-State Commission, which owns the line. Bi-State in that it's owned by the states of New Mexico and Colorado. And most passengers board a motor coach to return to the other terminal. The former Denver and Rio Grande Western Antonito station at the junction of the Santa Fe branch and the San Juan extension. And right in this general vicinity was the first Cumbres and Toltec Antonito station. It's the former Denver and Rio Grande Western mail car number 65. The San Luis and Rio Grande operate, or they did operate at this time of my visit, a Wednesday-only mixed train between Alamosa and Antonito using a former Santa Fe full dome. A very luxurious car when you think about it for a mixed train. Here's the 498 and 499, which are the 2 highest numbered narrow gauge locomotives owned by the Denver and Rio Grande. They're crossing the Conejos River Bridge. And yes, this is from back in the day, but I put it in there because I wanted you to see, compare it with this, which is San Luis and Rio Grande 115, which is off of the Union Pacific, with the mixed train crossing the Conejos River Bridge north of Antonito. And a little bit further up the road in Bountiful, one of the Amish families in the area came by while I was waiting for the train. And I didn't get a close-up of the train in Antonito because with a magnificent setting like that, I couldn't resist. And the mixed train passing the former Denver and Rio Grande Western La Habra Depot. Now, this is the business end of that train. It's a group of hopper cars that have been loaded with perlite. Perlite is this red clay-like stuff that is used, has a number of industrial uses, and plus is also used in women's makeup. So I think that covers it. So if there are any questions, I'm going to stop my share, bring back the Hollywood Squares picture, and ask away. And I'll reverently take off the hat. And so if you'll unmute, or Mike, if you'll unmute the audience, if anyone has any
folks,
questions.
thank you, Ed, for the presentation. Any questions for Ed?
And don't forget, there's the handouts that have information about the rolling stock and the history of these lines on your website. good for the downloading.
Yes. Any questions for Ed? I had a question, Ed. You mentioned the trains coming up the hill to Cumbres, paused to let the brakes cool off. When would
Yep.
they have used the brakes going up the hill?
Retainers, so they don't slide back.
Oh,
Just a little bit,
okay.
or at least that's what I was told.
All right.
Retainers are used for going downhill. They stop at the top of Cumbres to take water.
But they were stopped. They were not stopped by, well, right, there is a water tank there that they actually use a hose at Cumbres.
No, they use a standpipe.
Standpipe, okay, my mistake.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for that clarification. Good. Anything else for Ed?
Yeah, if I did anything wrong, please tell me. I'd like to fix it.
I would also point out here that Ed really went above and beyond with his presentations tonight and his handouts. It's a rare presenter when we have handouts that we have available to hand out. I hope you had the opportunity to download that. Provides more detailed and background information on our subjects. So thank you for that, Ed, and appreciate that the extra mile that you went.
You know what, I spent a number of years as teaching in an industrial setting, and I always used to rely on the handouts because, damn it, there was always going to be something you'd forget to mention.
Isn't that always the case? Exactly.
Yeah, I'll be
Hey.
kicking, call me up in about a half hour and I'll tell you what I missed in this show, I suppose.
Indeed. Anything else?
just-
Anything else
Yeah,
for
yes,
for Ed?
I had a question. Was that second car of the passenger car, that second car of that mixed train, a passenger car?
Yes, it was. It was that Santa Fe full dome, former
Mhm.
Santa Fe full dome.
Hmm. Wonder how they got that.
Well, the San Luis and Rio Grande is owned by the same people as the Iowa Pacific. The Iowa Pacific put together a group of cars for excursion service, and one of the cars they bought, and if memory serves me correct, it's a former Amtrak, former Auto Train Santa Fe large dome. I don't have the history in my head. In fact, if you give me a minute.
And while you're looking that up, Ed, I'll mention that Iowa Pacific is being liquidated through bankruptcy of trustees, and all that equipment is going to be scattered to the four winds. But it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah,
I had an opportunity to ride from Alamosa to Antonito on a special charter on Iowa Pacific, and then continued further on the Cumbres and Toltec to Sublette and back, and that was a fun trip.
yeah. The car. By the way, that full dome car, was originally Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe 551. Went to Auto Train. It's a rather complicated history. It's if any of you have access to the Amtrak database, it's 8000966 in the Amtrak numbering system. It's been in Alaska between 1994 and 2003. It's a well-traveled car, and it's the only way I can describe it is it's way overkill for this mixed train between Antonito and Alamosa. And I think the day I was photographed it, they only had 4 passengers, so the train crew was sort of hanging out in it too, because it's air conditioned. And it was just, a hoot. I don't know if they're still operating it because it just wasn't well used.
It's
Thank
not
you.
being used
Thank
at
you.
all now because it's being sold for, they're liquidating everything.
Right, I
So,
understand
and
that, but is the San Luis and Rio Grande still operating, or did they give up the ghost too?
It's operating under trusteeship, the freight service, because they have to maintain freight service until they're given permission to abandon the line, if that so indeed happens.
Yeah, that part I understand.
So Ed, when did you take those pictures of that train?
Those were from a trip in 2013. Uh, Basically, my wife has a cousin in Colorado. So I said to my wife, how would you like to spend 10 days with your cousin in Colorado? We flew out there, picked up the rental car in Denver, drove to Colorado Springs, left her, and then I went up into the mountains for 10 days.
That was
And-
very sweet of you. Nice of
Well,
you
I
to give.
did stop the car and carry her suitcase out of the car when we got to Colorado Springs. It's not like I pushed her out the window or anything.
Well, that's
How
a
long
good,
you been married?
yeah, right.
32 years. 33 in May.
Excellent.
That explains
Hi.
a few things.
This is Tom Sherritt.
Yes.
2 points I'd like to make is I'm familiar with those cars from the Iowa Pacific days. If you're interested in buying one, they're listed on the Ozark Mountain Railway equipment site. Don't know what the asking price is. They're nice cars, at least they were. Second thing, just as an update on the Rio Grande Southern, at Ridgeway, there is a museum that I think Ed mentioned, Ridgeway Railway Museum, and they now have completed a loop where they can operate their little RGS-1 motor, and I think they have a hand car or two, something like that. But they have a growing collection of pieces from the Rio Grande Southern, and a nice museum, well worth visiting. Also, the depot that you showed that was a residence has been sold. It's been bought now. I think it's a joint part of the Ridgeway Railway Museum and maybe the Ridgeway Welcome Center. It has been relocated from where it was when it was a home, but it still looks basically the same. But that's an update as of about 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the Ridgeway Railroad Museum is a very nice collection. Most of its equipment, though, except for the recreation of the Goose #1, was Denver and Rio Grande Western. I have pictures of all of it. So while they have a flavor of the Rio Grande Southern, and by the way, inside in the museum, they've got a diorama of the Ridgeway Roundhouse, only it's the Ridgeway Roundhouse on steroids. And the guy who did the model has modeled every locomotive known to be owned by the Rio Grande Southern, and they're all displayed out front. Everything from the Shea, from the Silverton Railroad to the former Colorado and Northwestern 74. It's all there. It's massive. If you're a modeler, it's something you really want to see. But again, I was concentrating on the Rio Grande Southern, so I was trying to avoid pure Denver Rio Grande Western equipment. But that's the only reason that you didn't see a lot of that museum. It's a great little, like I said, it's a great little museum, well worth a visit. I don't know, they still sell a book about Ridgeway and its time as a railroad. So as a railroad town, but it's well worth your time to take a trip out there and explore that area. And I see by Mike with his filter, he thinks my picture, since he's put sunglasses on, I guess my presentation was out of sight.
Yeah, it was great. It was actually.
I'm sorry.
No,
Listen,
no.
I'm
it's all
just
good.
trying for decent.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I will say to Tom Sherritt, Thank you for the information, number one. And number two, I'll acknowledge, I believe this is the first chapter meeting that you have been to in quite a long time. Is that correct, Tom?
We've attended 2 or 3 others, but I really enjoyed this one. I'm a narrow gauge fan. First rode the narrow gauge with my parents to Silverton in 1953, I think.
Okay, cool.
That's the days when there was just a single train running.
That's excellent. Well, I apologize for not noticing you on our previous meetings. Perhaps you were incognito. Maybe you were wearing some funny glasses or something, but we do appreciate that you're here. And in fact, Ron Burkhart sent me a personal message here just now saying he's sending his greetings to you. He was on several of the CNTS tours and Durango and Silverton charters that you were on, the charters that he ran for Trains Unlimited tours back in the day. So glad we were able to reconvene that connection. Anything else for our presenter before we stop the recording and move on?
I'm just looking, see if there's anything in the chat. There's a few comments in the chat. I didn't see anything much in the way of question.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to turn off the recording. We will put a recording of this meeting on our chapter YouTube page before too long.